Springfield Armory, the arsenal America left behind. In the spring of 1968, while American troops were still fighting in Vietnam, a federal arsenal in Massachusetts was preparing to shut its gates. That is the contradiction at the heart of Springfield Armory. This was not an obsolete workshop quietly fading after its usefulness had passed. This was the oldest federal armory in the United States, a place whose history reached back to the Revolution, whose machinery had shaped American manufacturing, whose rifles had been carried through the Civil War, 2 world wars, Korea, and the early years of Vietnam. And yet, at the very moment when the United States was still consuming rifles, parts, and military production capacity, Washington decided that Springfield Armory was no longer necessary. Workers who had spent their lives learning the feel of steel under a cutter, the sound of a proper fit, the difference between a drawing tolerance and a battlefield tolerance, were told that the institution around them would end. The buildings would remain, the name would survive, but the federal arsenal itself would not. But the real story is not simply that America closed a factory. The real story is how a country built one of the most important arms-making institutions in the world, depended on it for nearly 2 centuries, and then decided that the knowledge inside it could be replaced by contracts, accounting systems, and private industrial capacity. To understand Springfield Armory, you have to begin before it was a factory. You have to begin with a hill above the Connecticut River, in the middle of a war for independence, when the new American Army was short of almost everything: muskets, powder, tools, spare parts, trained artificers, and the administrative discipline required to keep weapons in usable condition. In 1777, General George Washington and the Continental authorities selected Springfield, Massachusetts as a strategic military storehouse. The choice was not romantic, it was geographic and industrial. Springfield sat inland, away from the immediate reach of British naval raids. It was connected by river routes and roads to New England's ironworking towns, timber supplies, and skilled craftsmen. It was close enough to support the Continental Army, but far enough from the coast to be defensible. In a war where imported arms were uncertain and domestic production was still immature, that combination mattered. At first, Springfield was a depot, not an arms factory. It stored muskets, cannon, ammunition, tools, and military supplies. It repaired weapons. It served as a federal military reserve at a time when the United States was not yet fully a nation in the modern administrative sense. Then, in 1787, the armory became more than a storehouse. During Shays' Rebellion, armed farmers and veterans in western Massachusetts moved toward the Springfield arsenal, hoping to seize weapons and force political change. The rebellion grew out of debt, taxation, post-war economic distress, and the weakness of government under the Articles of Confederation. When state militia forces stopped the insurgents outside the arsenal, the confrontation became one of the events that exposed how fragile the young American system was. Springfield had not yet become famous for manufacturing rifles, but it had already become a symbol of federal power. An arsenal was not just a building full of guns. It was a test of whether a government could protect its own military property, maintain order, and command the resources necessary for national defense. The crisis helped strengthen arguments for a more durable federal constitution. Springfield's importance was political before it was industrial. In 1794, Congress authorized the manufacture of small arms at Springfield. From that point forward, the hill above the Connecticut River became one of the central workshops of American military history. The early products were flintlock muskets based heavily on European patterns, especially the French arms that had influenced American forces during the Revolution. The Model 1795 musket, often associated with Springfield's first major production period, was not revolutionary in design. It was a smoothbore, muzzle-loading military arm of the late 18th century. Slow to load, limited in accuracy, dependent on flint, powder, weather, and the skill of the soldier. But its importance was not only in what it could do on a battlefield, its importance was in what it required from a factory. Every lock plate, barrel, stock, screw, spring, and fitting had to be made with enough consistency to assemble into a working military weapon. In the earliest years, that still meant enormous dependence on individual hand skill. A lock filer, stock maker, barrel maker, or inspector carried much of the standard in his hands and eyes. If one worker shaped a component differently from another, the weapon might still function, but it would not be truly interchangeable. That was the central problem facing early American arms manufacture. The young republic did not merely need guns. It needed a way to make guns in quantity, with repeatable quality, without relying entirely on isolated master craftsmen. It needed a manufacturing system that could preserve knowledge beyond the body of a single worker. Springfield Armory became one of the places where that problem was attacked most seriously. The phrase often used is the American system of manufacture: standardized parts, specialized machine tools, gauges, fixtures, and production methods designed so components could be made to consistent dimensions and assembled with minimal hand fitting. That system was not invented in one room by one man. It developed over decades across federal armories, private contractors, machine tool builders, and ordnance officers. But Springfield was one of its great laboratories. One of the most important figures in that transformation was Thomas Blanchard, a Massachusetts mechanic whose work at Springfield helped change what a machine tool could do. Blanchard is best remembered for his copying lathe, developed in the early 19th century and used for shaping gun stocks. A gun stock is not a simple plank of wood. It is a complex three-dimensional form that must hold the barrel, lock, trigger mechanism, furniture, and the soldier's shoulder in a precise relationship. Before mechanized copying, skilled workers shaped stocks by hand from patterns, relying on trained judgment and repeated practice. Blanchard's machine allowed a cutting tool to follow the form of a master pattern and reproduce that form in another piece of wood. The principle was simple to state and difficult to engineer. Let a machine trace the original and cut the copy. The result was not just faster production, it was a shift in where manufacturing knowledge lived. Before, the standard lived mainly in the craftsman. Afterward, more of the standard could live in the machine, the pattern, the fixture, and the inspection process. The worker still mattered, skill still mattered. But the institution had gained a way to multiply skill and make it repeatable. That was Springfield's first great industrial lesson. The weapon was never only the weapon. The weapon was the visible end of a hidden system. Gauges, drawings, machine tools, training, inspection, heat treatment, procurement, and the accumulation of small corrections over time. By the Civil War, that system would be tested on a scale the early republic could not have imagined. When the war began in 1861, the United States suddenly needed infantry arms in vast numbers. The Model 1861 Springfield rifle musket became one of the defining Union weapons of the conflict. It was a .58 caliber percussion rifle musket, firing a conical mini-type projectile through a rifled barrel. The technical leap from the older smoothbore musket was enormous. A smoothbore musket fired a round ball through an unrifled barrel. It could be devastating at close range, but its practical accuracy was limited. A rifled barrel, by contrast, used spiral grooves to spin the projectile, stabilizing it in flight. Combined with percussion ignition, which replaced the exposed priming pan and flint with a more reliable percussion cap, the rifle musket gave infantrymen greater range, better reliability, and more lethal precision. That change affected tactics, casualties, and battlefield expectations. But for Springfield Armory, it also meant industrial mobilization. The Armory had to expand output, coordinate with contractors, increase inspection capacity, and support an army fighting a continental war. Available historical records place Springfield's Civil War production of rifle muskets and related models in the hundreds of thousands, with the Model 1861 and its successors becoming central to Union supply. The rifle musket did not win the Civil War by itself. No weapon does. Wars are decided by logistics, command, manpower, morale, industry, politics, and chance. But Springfield's production helped show what a federal arsenal could do when the survival of the nation required arms on an industrial scale. The armory was no longer merely a place that made guns. It was a state institution for translating national emergency into manufactured objects. After the Civil War, Springfield continued to evolve through the age of breech loaders, metallic cartridges, and bolt-action rifles. The trapdoor Springfield conversions and later single-shot rifles reflected the transition from muzzle-loading black powder arms to cartridge-firing systems. The Krag-Jorgensen rifle brought the U.S. Army into the era of magazine-fed smokeless powder military rifles, though it also exposed the United States to the speed at which European small arms technology was advancing. Then came the M1903 Springfield. The M1903 was a bolt-action rifle chambered for the .30-06 cartridge after modification from its earlier chambering. It became one of the iconic American service rifles of the early 20th century and served through World War I, into World War I, in certain roles, and in later ceremonial, training, and sniper applications. Its design history is complicated by influence from the Mauser system. The United States paid royalties after patent disputes involving Mauser features, a reminder that even national arsenals operated inside a global web of technical borrowing, legal claims, and competitive military observation. The M1903 was accurate, strong, and well-made, but it also represented a world in which the bolt-action rifle was still the expected infantry standard. The next transformation would come from a man who was neither a general nor a university-trained engineer. John Cantius Garand was born in Canada and became one of the most consequential firearms designers in American history. Working at Springfield Armory, he spent years developing the semi-automatic service rifle that would become the M1 Garand. The problem was brutally difficult. A military semi-automatic rifle had to use the energy of firing to cycle the action, extract and eject the spent cartridge case, chamber a new round, and return to battery, all while remaining reliable under dirt, heat, cold, abuse, and hurried maintenance. It had to fire a powerful service cartridge. It had to be accurate enough for infantry use. It had to be manufacturable in quantity. And it had to be simple enough for millions of soldiers, many of them civilians only months earlier, to carry and maintain. Many countries explored semi-automatic service rifles before the Second World War. Few managed to field one in mass numbers before the conflict began. The M1 Garand was adopted by the U.S. Army in 1936. It used a gas-operated action and an 8-round on-block clip feeding an internal magazine. The details matter because they reveal Springfield's institutional strength. The rifle was not simply a clever mechanism. It was the result of long testing, revision, ordnance evaluation, production engineering, and the patient reduction of mechanical risk. A design that works on a bench is not yet a service rifle. A service rifle must work when made by the hundreds of thousands, inspected by strangers, issued to tired soldiers, and carried into places no engineer can fully simulate. Springfield Armory turned Garand's design into a production reality. During World War I, the M1 Garand became one of the most recognizable American infantry weapons. General George S. Patton famously praised it in exceptional terms, and while the phrase is often quoted, the deeper point is practical. American infantry entered the war with a standard self-loading rifle at a time when many opponents still relied heavily on bolt-action rifles. That did not make every American soldier invincible. It did not erase artillery, machine guns, terrain, training, fear, or supply. But it gave the individual rifleman a rate of fire advantage that mattered in combat. Springfield's role in that advantage was immense. The Armory produced millions of M1 rifles, while private contractors also contributed to total wartime output. Production expanded dramatically as the United States mobilized after Pearl Harbor. Workers came from the surrounding region. Women entered defense production in greater numbers. Machine tools ran continuously. Inspection systems had to preserve standards while volume rose under wartime pressure. This is where the romantic image of a rifle meets the unromantic truth of manufacturing. A soldier does not experience industrial capacity as a phrase. He experiences it when the bolt closes correctly, when the extractor holds, when the operating rod does not fail, when the rifle functions after rain, sand, cold, and impact. In combat, a small manufacturing error can become a life or death event. Springfield's reputation was built on the belief that those errors had been anticipated, reduced, inspected, and learned from. The mark on the rifle was more than branding. It was a claim of institutional memory. After World War I, however, the world that had made Springfield indispensable began to change. The United States emerged from the war with a vast private defense industry, a permanent national security state, nuclear weapons, global alliances, and new forms of procurement. The old model of a federal arsenal as the central maker, developer, and guardian of small arms knowledge no longer fit as comfortably inside the new defense system. Springfield still mattered. It continued research, development, testing, and production. Its final great service rifle was the M14, adopted in 1957. The M14 was intended to replace several weapons: the M1 Garand, the M1 carbine, the Browning automatic rifle, and some submachine gun rolls. It was chambered for the 7.62x50 Onum NATO cartridge and used a detachable box magazine. Mechanically and culturally, it was deeply connected to the Garand lineage, but it belonged to a different tactical world. The M14 was accurate and powerful. In some roles, especially marksmanship and later designated marksman applications, its strengths remained valuable. But as a general infantry rifle for the conditions of Vietnam, it faced serious limitations. It was relatively heavy. Its full-power cartridge made controllable automatic fire difficult, and jungle fighting often favored lighter rifles with higher ammunition capacity. At the same time, the AR-15 and later M16 represented a different philosophy: lighter cartridge, lighter weapon, higher carried ammunition load, and a new set of industrial and tactical assumptions. The debate over these weapons is often reduced to caliber, reliability, or soldier preference, but underneath it was a deeper institutional transition. Springfield Armory represented the old federal arsenal model: long memory, internal engineering, government production, and craft knowledge accumulated across generations. The emerging system relied more heavily on private contractors, centralized program management, systems analysis, and procurement decisions made through cost models and performance metrics. By the 1960s, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and his Department of Defense pushed aggressively for consolidation, efficiency, and measurable output. McNamara brought corporate management techniques and quantitative analysis into the Pentagon. In many areas, those methods exposed waste. In others, they narrowed the definition of value to what could be counted. Springfield Armory became vulnerable because its costs were visible and its deeper value was harder to quantify. Its buildings required maintenance. Its workforce consisted of federal employees with protections and obligations. Its machinery and facilities had to be justified against private contractors who could produce under contract. Its institutional knowledge did not appear neatly on a balance sheet. A machinist's judgment about the feel of a reamed chamber, the tone of a cutter, or the long-term behavior of a heat-treated component is real knowledge, but it is difficult to price. A production floor that has trained generations of workers is an asset, but it does not fit easily into a procurement spreadsheet. A federal armory capable of designing, testing, correcting, and producing small arms across decades is a national capability. But if the immediate question is cost per unit, that capability can look like overhead. That was the danger. Springfield was not defeated by one bad rifle or one failed contract. It was defeated by a new definition of efficiency. The decision to close the armory was announced in the 1960s, and operations ended in 1968. Local officials, workers, and political representatives resisted the closure, arguing that the arsenal's value could not be measured only by immediate production cost, but the larger direction of defense policy had moved against them. The armory that had helped define American arms manufacture was now treated as redundant. It is important to be precise. The closure of Springfield did not mean America had lost the ability to make firearms. Private companies continued to design and manufacture weapons. Other government arsenals and laboratories remained active. The United States did not disarm itself by closing one facility in Massachusetts, but it did lose something specific. It lost a federal small arms institution with roots in the Revolution, a place where production, research, repair, testing, and institutional memory had lived together for generations. It lost a culture in which the same landscape could connect a flintlock musket, a Civil War rifle musket, the M1903, the M1 Garand, and the M14. It lost a chain of apprenticeship that had moved from hand-fitting to machine tools to mass production to modern ordnance engineering. The machines could be moved, the documents could be filed, the buildings could be preserved. The working culture could not be transferred so easily. After the gates closed, the Springfield name entered a strange second life. In 1974, a private company in Geneseo, Illinois, began using the Springfield Armory name commercially. Today, Springfield Armory, Incorporated, is a well-known firearms manufacturer and importer. It sells products under a name that evokes the old federal arsenal, including rifles connected in design heritage to the M14 tradition. But the modern company is not the original Federal Armory. That distinction matters. The original Springfield Armory was a United States government arsenal in Massachusetts, operating from the Revolutionary era until 1968. The modern commercial company is a separate private entity. The name continued, but the institution did not. The brand could be revived. The federal arsenal could not. This is not an accusation. It is a historical clarification. Names can move through law. Heritage cannot move in the same way. A trademark can be registered. A manufacturing culture has to be lived, taught, corrected, and repeated over time. The original site did not disappear entirely. The Springfield Armory National Historic Site, administered by the National Park Service, preserves part of the former armory grounds and collection. Visitors can see weapons produced and associated with the armory across its long history. Early muskets, rifle muskets, trapdoor Springfields, Krags, M1903 SM1 Garands, M14s, experimental arms, tools, and records. A museum can preserve objects. It can preserve documents. It can tell the story. But it cannot make the factory alive again. That is the quiet power of the place. The buildings stand in Massachusetts, but they no longer hold the daily pressure of production. The benches, machines, inspection rooms, and storage spaces belong to history. A rifle in a display case can show what Springfield made. It cannot fully show the decisions, habits, corrections, and accumulated skill that made the rifle possible. There is also a human footnote that captures the character of the institution. John Garand, whose rifle became one of the most important American arms of the 20th century, was a government employee. His work belonged to the United States. He did not become wealthy from M1 royalties. Records indicate that Congress considered a monetary award for him after the war, but the effort did not produce the kind of reward many later observers believed he deserved. Garand's story is not just about personal compensation. It reveals the difference between invention as private property and invention as public service. At Springfield, some of the most consequential engineering work in American arms history was done inside a federal institution for a national purpose by men whose names were often less famous than the rifles they helped create. That was part of the Armory's strength. It was not built around celebrity. It was built around continuity. And continuity is exactly what America left behind. For nearly 2 centuries, Springfield Armory embodied a belief that national defense required more than emergency contracts. It required a standing body of knowledge. It required people who understood both design and manufacture. It required the patience to refine a weapon across years, not just purchase it across a fiscal cycle. It required a place where lessons from one generation could be handed to the next. That model was expensive. It was imperfect. It was sometimes slow, bureaucratic, and resistant to change. Federal arsenals were not magical institutions, and Springfield made mistakes like every human organization. But it held something that modern systems often struggle to preserve: the memory of how things are actually made. The closing of Springfield Armory was therefore not only an administrative event, it was a philosophical decision. It said that the United States could separate the name from the place, the production from the institution, the weapon from the culture that had produced it. In some ways, that decision worked. America's defense industry continued. New weapons were developed. Private firms supplied the military. The modern system did not collapse, but something older ended on that hill. The arsenal that began as a revolutionary storehouse survived rebellion, built muskets for a young republic, helped industrialize gun-making, armed Union soldiers, produced the M1903, turned the M1 Garand into a wartime reality, and completed the M14 as its final service rifle, was reduced at last to a historic sight and a memory carried by objects. The name went on. The arsenal did not. And somewhere on a range today, an old Springfield-made Garand still cycles through 8 rounds with a sound and rhythm that belong to another industrial age. The walnut may be worn smooth by hands long gone. The metal may carry marks from storage, service, rebuild, or decades of careful ownership. But when the action closes and the rifle fires, it is still performing the work assigned to it by machinists and inspectors in Massachusetts generations ago. It does not know that the factory is silent. It does not know that the name now lives elsewhere. It only proves with each movement of steel against steel that a vanished institution once knew exactly what it was doing. In the next episode, we follow the designer whose shadow stretches across almost every modern firearm story, John Moses Browning. The quiet mechanical genius whose patents armed armies, police forces, hunters, and factories around the world, and whose influence still sits inside weapons more than a century after he first drew them.